Well, we've had the change of seasons here in Tucson, and I'm not referring to the entrance into triple-digit temperatures, but noticing how along our roadsides the wildflowers have been replaced by big, ugly political candidate signs. I thought the last election never ended, based on the rhetoric, right? Well, it's time again. We're moving toward another one. And I heard an interview with a candidate who said that she was running to, quote, restore biblical family values, end quote. She was running to restore biblical family values. Now, there's some candidates who shorten this to family values. Some just use the word family. But often the folks who are saying this are coming from a particular Christian tradition, and they have a picture of legislation and government that would essentially put that Christian tradition encoded as the law of the land. Often is what these folks are talking about, and it was what she was talking about. But I remember it was a couple decades ago that I first heard political candidates use this phrase, biblical family values. And I remember asking, which biblical family are they talking about? Was it the family of Joseph, whose brothers were really jealous of him because their father showed favoritism to Joseph, and they tore off his multicolored coat and threw him in a pit to leave him to die? That family? Or the family of Lot, who after they escaped the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the daughters of Lot get their father drunk, hoping to have children by him? Or was it that first family, Adam and Eve? They got those two boys, Cain and Abel. That did not turn out very well. Cain murders Abel. Or even the family of Jesus. It's a much milder story here today, but his family aren't like, yes, Jesus, anointed one of God, keep going with that ministry. We're here for you, we support you, we see you, buddy. No, they think he's lost his mind, and in the story, they're coming to take him away. So biblical family values, not often rooted in the Bible itself. So usually it's a picture of a family that probably looks mostly white and suburban and heteronormative, something kind of out of a Norman Rockwell painting. Baseball and apple pie are involved. But even if it's not really connected with the Bible, it's a pretty good strategy politically to say that you're for families. Because after all, there's not a whole lot of the population who says they're anti-family, right? I mean, regardless of family experiences, most people are not like, I am against families. And there's lots of reasons for this. One that I find interesting is that scientists doing research on evolutionary biology, they note that we are likely selected for being pro-families. That an organism, this is called kin selection in evolutionary biology, an organism that first takes care of its own kin, that makes that the top priority, that values the immediate family above all else, is an organism most likely to propagate its genes. And so, we're here. We likely come from a long line of organisms, people, etc., who put family first, who highly valued family. And so, it's in our DNA, so to speak. And I don't mean people don't genuinely love their families. Of course we do. But there might be even factors at work that we're not conscious of, that have that sense of family first, which as it expands, as societies expand, it also became tribe first and nation first. But a sense of first, putting whoever I know or already like first. So that is likely part of just in us, wired for it. And in terms of surviving, it's a good strategy. In terms of keeping the genetic line going, it's an excellent strategy. But in terms of living into the reign of God, the vision of God, what Jesus talks about, it's going to fall short. Because let's say we say, and people say this, and I don't fault anyone for ever saying this, but it's like, my family is everything, or my family comes first. Well, if family is everything, how much energy or resources do we have to love our neighbors? And then welcome the refugee? And love the enemy? Forget about it. right? The circle can't expand very wide when it's centered in just this one thing. And so we are invited in the stories today, we see today that Jesus busts out of just valuing family in the way that his culture taught him and trained him to do. We talked last week a little bit about how Jesus comes on the scene and he recognizes that there are really two modes of life. And there's nuances and subtleties in all of this. But we talked about this last week. Some of us remember, I know there's a certain dog in the back that has the name of one of these words, Zoe and Bios. Are two Greek words, Bios and Zoe, B-I-O-S, and Zoe, Z-O-E, in the Greek. They both get translated into English as life. But Bios is surviving life. It's the life of just making it, of putting the self first or that family first or my tribe first, but it's survival life. It's eating, it's excreting, it's that level of living. And Jesus, when he says, I came that people have life, he doesn't use Bios. He uses Zoe. I came that people would have Zoe. And Zoe means animated life, vibrant life, fullness of life, abundant life. And Jesus says you actually have to lose life, Bios, in order to find life, Zoe. And he doesn't mean that we don't pay attention to surviving, because if we're dead, we're not going to get to Zoe very well, right? But it's where do we focus? Where's our energy? And Jesus teaches and preaches and shows a way where people let go of focusing first on Bios, on me first, family first, my tribe first, my nation first, and focus first on God. And center first in spirit, and center first in God, and that this connects with a capacity to live so deeply and widely that we could love our families and our tribe and our nation, but beautifully love the other, the stranger, and even, he says, the enemy. That's what happens when we move from Bios into Zoe, when we center first in God, where he says it in another passage, seek first the reign of God and right relationship with God, and the other things fall into place. And I think about when Jesus was teaching this way of love beyond my family first, which in his culture, I mean, no matter what you feel about your family, if you're like, I love my family's first, it does not compare to what family meant in first century Israel. It was everything. It was the basic unit of the economy. But Jesus bursting out of that and busting out of my tribe first or my land first, it was unheard of. What's he talking about? Why would he say such things? It probably seemed crazy, like his family and others are saying. Perhaps, maybe, even though we have heightened rhetoric of me first, family first, my nation first, my tribe first, we hear more and more of that, but perhaps we can understand better in our small world how interconnected we all are in ways they couldn't have understood in the time of Jesus. They did not have mass communication. They did not have global satellite networks. And so it's like Jesus knew what he was talking about ahead of his time. And perhaps in our own world, if we pay attention, are mindful of conditions, we see in ways that his people couldn't have easily seen, we are all in it together. That there is a human family, and if we are not caring for the human family, we all eventually hurt together. So I think about in terms of climate change. That's one example that comes to mind, where you could have a bunch of nations, they say, we're going to work hard to reduce our carbon footprint and to stop spewing dead dinosaur bits into the air that are trapping certain heat in our atmosphere, and it's changing the circulations, and that, yeah, you know, we've had the warmest 12 months, as far as scientists know, in the history of humans. In the last 12 months, something's up. And so there could be these nations say, we shall work together, and we shall do this. But if one big nation who uses lots of resources said, not me, then it hurts everybody. That isolation will hurt everybody, and there are people in Pacific Island countries who are not spewing much of anything into the atmosphere who will be the first to experience the seas rising over their land because other people all around the world weren't paying attention. We're in it together. Or I grew up in an era, and of course many of you experienced this era, where we had what they called disaster drills when I was in school, where we went into the hallway, in the cinder block hallways of my school, and we held a textbook over our head. And this was serving a dual purpose in the Midwest, tornadoes, but also in case of nuclear attack. Holy moly! A textbook over my head. And we knew better even as kids because we'd seen the news and read the stories. But I grew up in a world, and many of us, we've inhabited a world where if two nations decide they want to go to war that way, it's over for everybody and everything. We're in it together. And then more recently, in many of our memories, there was all these efforts where when the pandemic started, COVID-19 starts to spread. Well, we'll shut down these airports and we'll stop this, and we'll just do this in our country, whatever country it was. And then we watched how it spread across the world. And it maybe is faded from memory, but remember when we'd see video footage from cities all over the world, every hemisphere, of completely empty streets. We're all in it together. And Jesus was awake to this. Jesus was not a nationalist. Jesus was not family first, as you heard in the story. His family, and this was really, really radical what he says when his family's coming to get him. They don't get him. They don't get him here. They're trying to get him there. They don't get what he's about. And he says, who is my family? Who are my mother and my brothers and sisters? Those who are seeking God together, those who are embodying God's will together. That Jesus is breaking out of the normal, just biological family into a family of people connected by the Spirit across eventually nation, tribe, and tongue. Jesus saying this is what it's about. And so he teaches, he shows that we can, and we actually need to, be first centered in spirit. That we first seek God. That's what he taught his disciples. That it was what he teaches us. It was his top priority. Last week we were talking about Sabbath time. Jesus didn't just when I feel like it. He regularly took this time to be in the presence of God and to connect with other people seeking the presence of God. Jesus prayed and he listened, he worshiped, he celebrated, he shared meals, he received every possible nourishment, we might say, in the Spirit. And therefore, he was empowered to go beyond just the biology, to go beyond the genetics, to go beyond survival, to living in ways that connected across every border, every boundary. This is what Jesus lives, and he says, come, follow me, and he calls us to live into that too. There was a piece of this that I was going to share with you today, and then I heard something on the radio, and I changed. What I heard on the radio was a delight to me. I listen often driving here to Tucson's community radio station, KXCI. Now, KXCI, really somewhere low on the dial. It's in my presets. And I know some of you who are younger are like, radio? Just listening to whatever they throw at you? Well, KXCI mostly is playing all kinds of what used to be called alternative bands and music. On Sunday mornings, they play black gospel music. And I love it. Well, a song was playing, I'm like, that's really familiar. And they said, it's from years ago, it was the Detroit Mass Choir under the direction of Jimmy Dowell. God rest his soul. Jimmy Dowell directed a choir that I sang in. In 2001, after September 11th, and I won't get into all the details, but there were some people in the city along the shore of Lake Michigan in the state of Michigan who were talking about everyone seems more to come together after this crisis. But people understood the wisdom, we will not stay together unless we engage in something intentional and practices that keep people together. And there are people, they'd been in a gospel music workshop, and they were working with also a choir director who did sacred choral music and other more, I'll call it traditional white music in churches and in schools, and taught at a summer camp for performing arts in northern Michigan. And they invited these two directors, a white man and a black man. And the black man grew up in this city in western Michigan, but was from Detroit, or was currently serving a church in Detroit. And they would come out and they led a rehearsal every week in my church because we were a big enough church in the downtown to hold all these people. We had 150 voices in the choir. And it is the most diverse group of people I've ever been part of. Black, white, Latino, LGBTQ+, Unitarians, African Methodist, Episcopal, Congregational, Methodist, Lutheran, ELCA, and Missouri Synod. If you grew up Lutheran, you know that. Those people are not usually in the same room. But we were united in song and in spirit. And it was called the Community Connects Choir. And it took a while to build it to this. And we performed in the large performing arts center in the downtown of our city and did a concert free for the community. People brought donations to the food pantry. But I remember, and why I'm sharing this story, that all came back when I heard Jimmy Dowell, the black director on KXCI here in Tucson, conducting the Detroit Mass Choir. The song, by the way, is called "The Storm is Passing Over." I'd like a storm to come right now, like rain, right? But still. There was a lot of beautiful interconnection that happened in that. People who were sitting next to each other who would never probably have known each other otherwise. And by the way, we were singing music with sheet music, like a lot of you, if you're singing a church choir here, you have that. And there were a lot of people from Latino and black churches who did not learn music that way. They learned it by hearing it and having it lined to them and singing back with harmonies. And then there were people like me who grew up with the notes and were afraid to sing naked without notes, right? But we were all in it together, learning these different ways of doing music together and singing both kinds of music on the spectrum. So there was a conversation I was party to hear, and it was beautiful, and it gives me a sense of the Spirit, and it felt to me like it was connected with the story about what makes for family. There's two men who were sitting next to each other in one of the sections. One of the men, white, Germanic background, the other man, Latino. And they had gotten to know each other, they'd become friends. And there was a group of us just chatting, a small group of us one time after rehearsal. We've been at this for months. And the white Germanic man said to the man who was Latino, said, "I feel like I owe you an apology. I came in here ignorant in all kinds of ways. I've heard some of your story." This man who's Latino had come to work there's a fruit belt along Lake Michigan. And there are a lot of people from Mexico who work in those vineyards and those orchards. And he had entered our nation illegally originally, but he'd been here for a long time and was a citizen now. But the white man said, "I used to always call people like you illegals. That was my word for you, illegals. And I recognize now I dehumanized you. To call you illegals is not to see your humanity. It's not to know your story. And I have sinned against you. And I ask for your forgiveness." And the Latino man said, "Good. I forgive you." And they embraced. And for me, it was just one small reminder that came back to me this morning about what Jesus is up to, about going beyond the surviving, going beyond just taking care of me or my family, my nearest and dearest, my tribe, my nation. What happens when we are in the Spirit, what happens when we seek first the reign of God, we connect with Zoe life. We connect with abundant love. We don't build higher walls, we build bigger tables. And that's what the world needs. Jesus shows us the way. Come and see. Amen.